Hi, I'm Rob, here once more in my basement, working on my latest, greatest masterpiece, with a bit of coffee. Good time to take a break and have a chat. Agreed? Good. So, today I'm doing a lot of writing, because I feel pretty useless. I slipped on some ice and hurt my back and hip, and have been kind of in agony through a large part of the day, mostly helped by the fact that I haven't done a whole lot. So painkillers and, again, pretty idle lifestyle have led me to feeling a bit better after all the rest, but not having had a lot accomplished. I hadn't shot any videos today. But I have been writing. I've been doing some work there, which is good. I did some work on the game that I'm working with Tim Samwise 7 Harper, called 18 Inches of Blood. And that's a fun little work. I've also been working a little bit on my own personal game, which is going to be called Soul of the City, which is a little bit different. This is kind of an exclusive for you. The only person I've talked to about this particular game has been the person who inspired it, my friend Rick, who you can find on YouTube under Your Seat at the Table, where he talks about classic old school games like Star Wars or Star Trek, the original series stuff, and Twilight 2000, things like that. And he put out a video talking about his campaign that he's running, and talking about how the city that he's using, which is one of the Judges Guild's pre-made cities, this one's called Tarantus, how it basically serves as its own character in a way, in that it's a living, breathing structure that affects and impacts, everything about the world around it. And I thought, well, why couldn't a town be a character? Or a city, for that matter. A city is just a large town, which itself is a large village, which itself is a large settlement. A settlement is really nothing more than a couple of huddled houses. And each step along the way you have more people, but you also have more resources that draw people to this town as they glom together. And aren't, adventurers basically people who are glomming on bunches of abilities and skills and stacking them up so they can take on stronger and stronger opponents? So that kind of advancement kind of goes hand in hand with the progression of a city. Just instead of day to day, week to week, dungeon to dungeon, you instead, endure seasons and years, and the threats are still, capable of wiping you out. You have an orc invasion that's threatening your town, or starvation, or plague, or strange magic, or there's definitely ways that you can write a story where the town itself is almost its own person, and how it reacts to things via the people inside of it, certainly, but a town that is well realized and has lots of resources to it can weather those kind of threats. Maybe it's because of its strong defense. If it's out on the frontier, it makes sense. If it has a powerful military, perhaps it doesn't fear orcs as much, or maybe the shambling undead, or things like that. So Soul of the City basically allows you to play as a town or a city, which I think is fairly unique. I know there are games that have town simulators where you can, replicate the things that are going on, but not many of them really approach the town as its own living, breathing entity. Plus, I'm using my own Dicephile system for this one. Yes, it'll be the first thing that I have that actually uses my Dicephile system. But because of the lens structure of my game, it actually flows perfectly with this concept. without drastically changing the rules, just changing the lens from town view to character view. You can use the same mechanics and same game structure, and instead of dealing with a threat as an entire town, you can, if you have heroes living inside of your town, send them out to go and deal with a threat. Granted, an orcish horde might be more than a single hero could do, but if that hero can infiltrate through the horde and kill the leader of the horde, it'll drastically diminish how threatening that is. So that if the horde does come against the town without that leader, that hero may have saved the town without having actually slaughtered all of the orcs and dispersed the entire horde. It may have weakened it in a way that reduces its code effectiveness on how powerful it might be of a threat, and gives the town that much better of a chance of fighting it. Also, scaling is fairly easy to accomplish too. There's the macro scaling where all of your primary things are on very large scale, like defense. What is defense? Defense of a town could be the walls, it could be the guard, the people who are trained to do nothing else but guard the town. It could be having a standing army. It could be having mountains and physical structures around that protect the town from invading. So if you want to micro that, instead of towns, you could have that have a defense stat. You could have walls as a stat, going from D4, from palisades that basically give your people standing behind it something to hide behind when the arrows come in that they can fire back, or a ditch that's in front that would give a small bonus, not a very large one, but it might be enough to help prevent disaster when the orcs come. Whereas 50-foot tall high granite walls that are backed and crenellated and have the matriculations and everything would give a much larger bonus to the town for its defenses. And if the orcs are attacking in siege style, then that wall stat will be a pertinent stat for defending. Perhaps the wall and the moat will also come into play, so both of those stats can be rolled in the Dicephile system to prevent that attack from the orcs. On the other hand, if you're going to reduce that, then the orcs will have the stat for their forces of their army, but also any other sneaky things that they can do that's parts of that force. Perhaps the cavalry won't be of any use because there's a wall there or because there's a moat there, but if they build siege engines, and those siege engines will have a value as well as the orcish force itself, and there's a lot that you can do with the game system. Depends on the scale that you want to do. You could do a very, very general game system, and you'd still have just as rewarding of a time as if you broke it down. It all depends on how much detail you really want. So, proud of the system. I like it, and it's mine. I better. And there's obviously more to it than that, but yeah. So that's going pretty well. I'm excited about that. I've had my Dicephile system since I came up with it in 2014. I've developed it a bit since, and this is the first time I'm really applying it in a way that's got me excited and energized, and I just want to put this into people's hands. So I'm only going to go with the macro, rather than getting down into minute details and turning it into a 300-page manuscript. It's just going to be a fairly general game system, and then I'll eventually produce a deluxe set that'll have the micro versions, which I think should be very exciting. The nice thing is it doesn't change the rules at all, it just changes the lenses that you use. And likewise, like I said, you can use it to represent the people in the town or heroes that you send out of the town. Just instead of coding for defenses and wealth and crime, instead you code for combat prowess and gear, or individual skills and attributes and things like that. So yeah, I'm excited about that. But kind of, I guess what I'd have to talk about is the idea is with Soul of the City, it's my idea. It was inspired by something which is cool. Inspiration comes from a wide variety of sources. Books you've read, movies you've watched, and things like that. Of course, you have to be careful not to plagiarize, but inspiration can come from all over the place, and that's cool. things that are of yourself, you should be the biggest fan of. You should be the champion of it and want it to do well. We are our own worst critics, but at the same time, you have to celebrate the victories when they come, because you can't assume they'll always be there. At the same time, though, it's sometimes refreshing, I have found, to look outside of oneself for that next thing, outside of your comfort zone. And I know a lot of people don't do that. Some people just stick with the taste that they like. If you've had vanilla ice cream all your life, that's all you've ever had was vanilla, and you turn up your nose at the idea of chocolate or mint or what have you, without ever having tasted it, you don't know for sure if you ever really didn't like any of those other flavors, because you've never tried them. You may have heard of them, you may have had them described, but because you have your preference that's all you've ever done, it kind of limits what might actually be a better natural fit than what you've always enjoyed. And you'll still always have vanilla. I find this to be kind of a tragic setting, that gamers can just bury their heads in the sand and not consider other sources. I know people who are scornful of indie games, for instance. They only prefer the ones that come out from the big companies because those are the ones with a lot of times the best resources, the best backing, things like that. But at the same time, there are some phenomenal ideas that go out there that go unappreciated by these people. And a lot of times you have to kind of go looking for some of these. If I go to my game company, right, my game store, the Chimera Hobby Shop of Fond du Lac, who's not my sponsor yet, we'll see. They have one shelf that's dedicated to role-playing games. It used to be several. That's just the state we're in. They'd make a lot more on board games and comics, I suspect. And things like Warhammer, the miniatures have a large section too. But there's still a whole shelf of role-playing games, which is better than a lot of places. And they're served spine out so that there's lots of books on those shelves, most of them. Of course, the ones with the most popular games are faced out so you can see them really well. All the 5th edition D&D stuff has their own window with all the books, for the stock in the shelves below. And they constantly replenish them as they sell down. They get good sales on those. Of course, 5th edition is the new hotness, and deservedly so. It's a great game system. I do like it. But if you move down a bit, you find some of the other game systems. Of course, the fantasy games are right there. You have all the Pathfinder stuff, for instance. Lots and lots and lots and lots of books of Pathfinder. A person could easily go broke acquiring everything that's been published for Pathfinder. Paizo is prolific, which is good. It's a business model that seems to be working fairly well for them. I'm sure not all of their hits have been out of the park, but they're still in business, and that's more than you can say for a lot of companies. Especially when they lost their bread and butter with the contract they had with Wizards of the Coast to produce their magazines and eventually their own adventure paths with Pathfinder's original offering. Later on, eventually, they turned that into their own company with the Open Gaming license and developed that into Pathfinder. But so there's a ton of that. And then you have all the Warhammer stuff, and there's a good chunk of that. And then you have some of the lesser-known games. They're not indie games, but they've been out for a while. There's Paranoia right there. There's Shadowrun with Catalyst Games, and you have a whole bank of Doctor Who role-playing games. I can just picture this right now. You have a couple of the paperbacks from the lesser traded ones. There's Fiasco right there. And there's just a nice selection. What you don't see a lot of are their old games, and he's got one of the biggest collections. The owner has one of the biggest collections of classic role-playing games and materials. If you can only get access to it, I mean, it's a shame sometimes how much stuff they've got that they just can't sell because they don't know where it is or can't access it. I know I've got my wish list with them, but they don't get things to me very often. But I can go right there, and I know that there's a bunch of titles that I don't have in my library. My shelves are, pretty full, but they're only full of about 10 different role-playing games because I know what I like, and I've tried to diversify. I've got several games to fit several different styles of play. But I understand that there are a lot of games out there I have never played. And some of the cases, that's a shame. I find myself adapting periodically when I try a new game. I add things to my arsenal of play. Even if I don't play that game, a lot of times there's something that I can take away from a game and decide to use and work off of. For instance, from Ars Magica, it's an interesting game world. The world is fairly rich, actually. I really need to find some source books from that because I bet they'd be really good reading. But the concept is all of the players have a wizard. And then they sit down and they make a bunch of other characters. Not only do they have their powerful wizards, but they have the wizards are basically helpless. All they do is magic. And if they can't solve a problem with magic, they can't deal with it. So they have retainers that do that. They have accountants to handle money, because wizards can't do money. They have custos, bodyguards, so that if they're physically threatened, they don't have to blast everything with magic all the time. They can let their bodyguard step in and maybe slow down a thing so that they can work their magics and take care of a problem. And at the same time, all the retainers understand that they work for a powerful wizard, or a school of powerful wizards, rather, and those wizards can bail them out if things get really bad. So sometimes all they have to do is hold on and let the wizards finally get to doing what they have to do. It can lead to some interesting dynamics, but the most interesting thing is that people take turns playing the wizards, but you're not always going to play the wizard. And sometimes that means that by not playing the wizard, you can be playing a more dynamic role in the story than you would if you had your wizard. Because you have a character who has useful skills to a given scenario. So if you're playing and you go into a city and the wizard is just looking for some resources for his magic, and you are playing the procurer, you could be doing a lot of the role-playing where the wizard is just doting around looking for stuff and trying not to get killed by a cut purse. And the custos, the bodyguard, is racking their brains trying to make sure that the wizard that they're pledged to survives. So they're going to get in a lot of action trying to make sure that the wizard stays intact. The wizard's player may have the least amount to do. Okay, I'll look to see if this is the actual ingredient I need. Then I'll look to see if it is viable for what I need it for. Okay, this is a failure. I'm going to have to go elsewhere. Turning to the retainers, can you find somebody who can find another source of this for me? That is a neat idea that I think the next time I play a role-playing game, I'm probably going to have the players draft up a couple of extra characters. Maybe not one for everybody in the group. But if one person, say, is caught up and already has their character, I might have them make another one. So that there can be, if you get tired of your character when, adventures change, you can bring a new character into the game and try taking on things from a different angle. It'll make the group be a little bit bigger, even if everybody is not there at the time. Much like if you've ever read a comic book and a crisis comes up and not all the heroes from the team happen to be there. This happens to the Avengers a lot because their individual members go all over and have their own individual adventures. So at any given moment, maybe 50 to 70% of the team is there at the time. Fortunately, that team got pretty big, so they can handle losing a few people here and there. But if you have a big heavyweight that comes in and Thor and the Hulk aren't around, then the others are really going to have to work hard to pick up that slack. And then you'll really appreciate having a versatile person like, say, Iron Man around, who can call up the Hulkbuster armor and try to have a go with something that's up on that power level, but also has the know-how and firepower to take on other kinds of threats in different ways. I guess what I'm saying is that with 18 Inches of Blood, which I talked about earlier, a game that I'm working on, way outside of my comfort zone. I don't usually do horror. I prefer heroic roleplay. I've played horror. I've run horror games from Call of Cthulhu, GURPS Horror, Beyond the Supernatural. There's a lot of them. Those are the ones I've done. I've played Chill. Cult. Played Cult once. So, I've got some experience with them, but it's not my thing. It's not what I generally prefer to do. But this one is some people will call splatterpunk. Lots of blood, lots of violence, a very visceral feel. It's on a fantasy world, but everything that's good that makes your characters stand out and be powerful generally is paid for in blood. It's very visceral, and it's neat getting to play in something like that, even if that's not what I normally would do. But I spent a lot of time today poking around into it, filing off some rough edges, adding some description, and I'm really excited about the game. I think it's going to do really, really well in our little niche that we're going to hopefully find for ourselves. And maybe we'll go on and do some other things together, because Tim is a blast to work with. This is mostly his idea, and then he said, Rob, go crazy on it. And so I'm editing, and I'm adding and expanding and proposing things, and we're coming to agreements, and I have to be very careful not to be too aggressive with my viewpoints. And to, I'm used to working by myself, but I have to get better at collaborating. So that's what I'm focusing on right now, and getting these games to a prepared state. And like I said, I think it's really healthy to try different things, even if you aren't going to change your style, even if you're going into something thinking that this is not for you. If the opportunity comes and you have a chance to play a different game than what you're used to, I say go for it, with an open mind as you can. And you just might find some of the quirks and wrinkles and things might suit you pretty well. And even if you don't go with that game, you can pull some things out that could be rather useful. Just some thoughts mulling over while drinking coffee and working on a day when I hurt. But I can get something good out of the day. And I hope that you got something good out of your day too, and that I find you in better health and good spirits. Until next time I crawl in front of the internet, thanks for watching and sticking with me. As always, Coffee with Rob is only going to be here with subscribers to my Facebook channel for OmnusI, or the Lair of OmnusI on YouTube. So, if you've seen this, you have my thanks and gratitude, and this one's for you. Till next time, farewell.